The rusty key trembled in my hand as I stood before the weathered shed door, 18 months after leaving Riverside Children's Home, with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes and a heart full of questions. The metal was cold against my palm, worn smooth by decades of use, and I could barely believe that this small piece of steel had become the bridge between the girl who aged out of the system with nowhere to go and the woman I was about to become. I turned the key slowly, hearing the ancient lock click open with a sound that seemed to echo through my entire life. The door creaked on its hinges, and sunlight streamed into the dusty interior, illuminating something that made my breath catch in my throat. There, covered in a faded tarp, sat a pristine 1967 Mustang convertible, cherry red paint gleaming beneath the dust like a hidden treasure. But it wasn't just the car that stopped my heart. It was the envelope taped to the windshield with my name written in careful script, and the realization that someone had been planning for my future long before I even knew they existed. That moment in the shed feels like a lifetime ago now, but I can still remember every detail with perfect clarity. The way the afternoon light caught the chrome bumper, the smell of old leather and motor oil, the sound of my own breathing in the sudden silence. But to understand how I got there, how a 17-year-old girl with no family and no prospects ended up holding the key to her own transformation, I need to take you back to where it all began. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. I was 3 days past my 18th birthday when I walked out of Riverside Children's Home for the last time, carrying everything I owned in 2 garbage bags, wearing the same thrift store jeans I'd had for 2 years. The social workers had done their best to prepare me for independent living, but there's no real way to prepare someone for the weight of complete isolation. I had aged out of the system, which sounds official and planned, but really just means the state stops being responsible for you whether you're ready or not. The transitional housing program gave me a tiny studio apartment in a building that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. My neighbors were mostly other former foster kids, young mothers trying to make it work, and elderly people on fixed incomes. We all had that same look in our eyes, like we were waiting for the other shoe to drop, like we didn't quite believe we deserved to take up space in the world. I worked at a grocery store stocking shelves during the night shift, which paid just enough to cover rent and ramen noodles. The work was mindless and solitary, which suited me fine. I had never been good at making friends or trusting people. When you grow up moving from home to home, you learn that attachment is a luxury you can't afford. People leave, situations change, and the only person you can count on is yourself. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March. 6 months after I'd left Riverside, I almost threw it away without opening it because I figured it was another bill or some kind of official notice that would just stress me out. The return address said Douglas Turner, attorney at law, from a town called Milbrook that I'd never heard of. The envelope was thick cream-colored paper, the kind that suggested money and importance, things that had never touched my life. I sat on my second-hand couch and opened it carefully, my hands shaking slightly. The letter was typed on official letterhead, and the words seemed to swim before my eyes as I tried to process what I was reading. It began formally, addressing me as Miss Donna Nguyen, and explained that I was the sole beneficiary of the estate of one Elizabeth Robinson, who had passed away 3 months earlier. Elizabeth Robinson. The name meant nothing to me at first, just 2 words on expensive paper. But as I kept reading, the lawyer explained that Elizabeth had been my great-aunt, my grandmother's sister, and that she had left me her entire estate, including a house, 40 acres of farmland, and what the letter described as various personal effects and vehicles. I read the letter 3 times before the words started to make sense. I had family, or rather I had had family, and now she was gone, but she had remembered me. She had left me everything she owned, which according to the letter's careful legal language, was substantial. There was a phone number to call and an appointment to be scheduled, and suddenly my tiny apartment felt even smaller, like the walls were closing in on my old life to make room for something I couldn't even imagine. The phone call with Douglas Turner was surreal. His voice was kind but professional, and he explained that Elizabeth Robinson had been tracking my progress through the foster system for years, working with private investigators to make sure she always knew where I was. She had never reached out directly because of complicated family circumstances that he would explain when I came to Milbrook, but she had been planning to leave me her estate since I was a small child. When I asked why she had never contacted me, his voice grew softer. He said that Elizabeth had made mistakes when she was younger, had been estranged from my grandmother over issues he couldn't discuss over the phone, and had spent decades regretting her choices. Leaving me the farm was her way of trying to make amends, of giving me the stability and security she wished she could have provided while she was alive. The trip to Milbrook took 4 hours on a Greyhound bus that smelled like stale cigarettes and industrial cleaning supplies. I brought one small backpack with a change of clothes and the letter, folded and refolded so many times the creases had worn soft. The landscape outside the window gradually changed from urban sprawl to suburbs to farmland, and I pressed my face against the glass watching fields and barns roll past like scenes from a movie about someone else's life. Milbrook turned out to be the kind of small town you see on postcards, with a main street lined with brick buildings that looked like they'd been there for 100 years. There was a hardware store with rocking chairs on the front porch, a diner with checkered curtains in the windows, and a bank with a clock tower that chimed the hour. It felt like stepping back in time, and I wondered what a girl like me, who had grown up in the city bouncing between foster homes, was supposed to do in a place like this. Douglas Turner's office was above the bank, up a narrow staircase that creaked under my feet. He was older than I had expected, maybe 60, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His office was lined with law books and smelled like leather and coffee, and when he shook my hand, his grip was firm and warm. He offered me coffee and a chair across from his desk, and then he opened a thick file with my name on the tab. Inside were documents I couldn't begin to understand, but also photographs, and when he spread them out on the desk, I felt my breath catch. There was a picture of a farmhouse with a wraparound porch, another of rolling fields dotted with oak trees, and one of a red barn that looked like something from a painting. "This is your inheritance," he said, and his voice carried a weight that made me understand this was more than just property. This was a legacy, a chance at the kind of life I had never dared to imagine for myself. Elizabeth Robinson had owned 40 acres of some of the most beautiful farmland in the county, along with a house that had been in our family for 3 generations. But then he showed me the other photographs, the ones taken more recently, and my heart sank. The house needed significant repairs, the barn was leaning dangerously to one side, and the fields were overgrown with weeds and brambles. Elizabeth had been sick for several years before her death, and the property had suffered from neglect. The inheritance came with enough money to make the necessary repairs, but it would require hard work, dedication, and a willingness to learn everything from scratch. I stared at the photographs for a long time, trying to imagine myself in that farmhouse, trying to picture a life so different from everything I had known. Douglas Turner waited patiently, and when I finally looked up, he was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "There's something else," he said, and reached into his desk drawer. He pulled out an old jewelry box, wooden and worn, with delicate carvings around the edges. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a letter addressed to me in handwriting I had never seen before, and a small brass key attached to a faded ribbon. The letter was from Elizabeth, written in her own hand just weeks before her death. Her handwriting was shaky but determined, and as I read her words, I felt tears starting in my eyes for the first time since I was a child. She told me about my grandmother, her sister Margaret, and how they had quarreled over Margaret's decision to give up her daughter, my mother, for adoption. Elizabeth had disagreed with that choice, had wanted to raise the baby herself, but Margaret had been stubborn and proud. The fight had torn their family apart, and by the time Elizabeth realized how wrong she had been to let pride keep her from reaching out, it was too late. My mother had died young, and I had disappeared into the foster system before Elizabeth could find me. She had spent years searching, had hired investigators, had watched from a distance as I grew up in homes that couldn't give me what I needed. The letter apologized for her absence, for the years of loneliness I had endured, and for waiting until death to reach out. But she also expressed hope that the farm could give me what she had never been able to provide: a place to belong, a chance to put down roots, and the security that comes from owning something that no one can take away. The key, she explained, opened a shed behind the barn where she had stored something special for me, something that represented the dreams she had held for my future. She didn't say what it was, just that I would understand when I found it. Douglas Turner drove me out to the property that afternoon, his sedan bumping along a gravel road lined with oak trees that formed a natural canopy overhead. When the farmhouse came into view, I felt something shift inside my chest, a recognition that didn't make logical sense but felt as real as breathing. The house was bigger than it had looked in the photographs. 2 stories with a wraparound porch and gingerbread a trim that needed painting, but still held traces of its original charm. The roof needed work, and some of the windows were boarded up, but the bones of the structure were solid, built to last by people who understood that home was something worth investing in. We walked through the house room by room, and Douglas Turner pointed out the necessary repairs while I tried to imagine myself living there. The kitchen was enormous, with cabinets that went up to the ceiling and a farmhouse sink beneath a window that looked out over the backyard. The living room had a stone fireplace and built-in bookshelves, and upstairs there were 4 bedrooms with slanted ceilings and dormer windows. It was overwhelming and beautiful and terrifying all at once. I had never lived anywhere that felt permanent, had never had a room that was truly mine for more than a few months at a time. The idea of owning an entire house, of having the freedom to paint walls and hang pictures and plant flowers, was so foreign that I couldn't quite wrap my mind around it. The barn was in worse shape than the house, listing to one side and missing several boards, but Douglas Turner assured me that it could be repaired. Behind it, almost hidden by overgrown bushes, was a small wooden shed with a padlock that looked newer than the rest of the structure. "This must be what the key opens," he said, and I pulled the brass key from my pocket with hands that were trembling slightly. The lock turned easily, and the door swung open to reveal the car that would change everything. Even covered by the tarp, I could tell it was something special. The shape was sleek and low, and when I pulled away the covering, the cherry red paint seemed to glow in the afternoon sunlight. It was a 1967 Mustang convertible, fully restored with white leather interior that looked like it had never been sat in. Douglas Turner whistled low under his breath and walked around the car, running his hand along the perfect paint job. "This is worth a fortune," he said, and I could hear the amazement in his voice. "Elizabeth must have had this restored specifically for you." There was an envelope taped to the windshield with my name on it, and inside was another letter from Elizabeth. This one shorter but somehow more personal. She explained that the car had belonged to my grandmother Margaret when they were young women, that they had taken road trips together in it during the summers before their fight drove them apart. Elizabeth had bought the car from Margaret's estate years later and had it completely restored, hoping that someday she would have the chance to give it to me as a symbol of the adventures and freedom that every young woman deserved. She had imagined me driving it to college, to job interviews, on dates with young men who would treat me with respect and kindness. The letter ended with instructions about insurance and registration, and a reminder that the car was mine to do with as I pleased. I could sell it to help pay for the farm repairs, or I could keep it as a reminder that I was part of a family that had loved me even when I didn't know they existed. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time that day, my hands on the steering wheel, trying to process everything that had happened. 6 hours earlier, I had been a girl with no family and no prospects, stocking shelves in a grocery store and living in a studio apartment that smelled like other people's disappointments. Now I was a landowner, a car owner, someone with choices and possibilities stretching out before me like an open road. Douglas Turner was patient while I processed everything, answering my questions about property taxes and insurance and the logistics of actually living on a farm. He recommended contractors for the house repairs and introduced me to Jonathan Jones, a local farmer who had been keeping an eye on Elizabeth's property and who offered to help me learn the basics of land management. The decision to move to Milbrook wasn't really a decision at all. It felt like coming home to a place I had never been, like finally finding the missing piece of a puzzle I hadn't even known was incomplete. I gave notice at the grocery store, packed my few belongings, and used some of the inheritance money to hire a moving truck that looked ridiculous pulling up to my tiny apartment. The first few months were harder than I had expected. Living alone in a big house after years of cramped apartments and shared bedrooms was disorienting, and the silence at night was so complete, it kept me awake. I had never heard quiet like that, without traffic or sirens or the sounds of other people's lives bleeding through thin walls. The house repairs took longer than expected and cost more than budgeted, even with the inheritance money. I learned to stretch every dollar, to comparison shop for materials, and to do some of the simpler work myself. Jonathan Jones became my unofficial mentor, teaching me about soil testing and crop rotation and the dozens of small details that separate successful farming from expensive hobbies. He was in his 50s with calloused hands and a quiet way of speaking that made you lean in to listen. His own farm bordered Elizabeth's property, and he told me stories about my great aunt that helped me understand the woman who had shaped my future from a distance. Elizabeth had been stubborn and independent, he said, but also generous and kind to anyone who needed help. The first winter was brutal. The old furnace broke down twice, and I spent one memorable week heating the house with space heaters and wearing every piece of clothing I owned. But there was something about the challenge that appealed to me, something about proving to myself that I could handle whatever came my way. Spring brought its own set of challenges and revelations. As the snow melted, I discovered that the property included a small orchard behind the house, apple trees that had been neglected but were still alive. Jonathan Jones helped me prune them properly, and by summer they were producing fruit that tasted like nothing I had ever eaten from a grocery store. I started a small vegetable garden that first year, in just a few rows of tomatoes and beans and lettuce. The physical work was satisfying in a way that stocking shelves had never been, and there was something magical about putting seeds in the ground and watching them grow into food. I began to understand why people talked about farming as a calling rather than just a job. The community in Milbrook was slower to warm up to me than the land was, but eventually I found my place there too. The woman who ran the diner, Carolyn King, became a friend and informal advisor, teaching me about local customs and introducing me to other young people in town. The hardware store owner, Matthew Cruz, extended credit when money was tight and never made me feel like charity case. By the end of my first year, the house was livable and the basic infrastructure was repaired. I had learned to drive a tractor, to recognize the signs of plant disease, and to fix a leaky faucet without calling a plumber. More importantly, I had learned what it felt like to belong somewhere, to be part of a community that knew my name and cared about my success. The Mustang sat in the shed for most of that first year, too precious to drive and too valuable to risk damaging on the rough country roads. But on my 19th birthday, exactly 1 year after receiving Elizabeth's letter, I decided it was time to take it for its first real drive. I had been practicing in Jonathan Jones's old pickup truck, getting comfortable with driving on gravel roads and learning to navigate the winding country lanes that connected the farms in our area. The Mustang drove like a dream, smooth and powerful, and I felt like I was floating as I cruised through the countryside with the top down and the wind in my hair. I drove to the cemetery where Elizabeth was buried, a small plot behind the Methodist church in town. Her grave was marked with a simple stone that gave her name and dates, and I sat there for a long time, telling her about the farm and the house and the life I was building with the gifts she had left me. The second year brought new challenges and new growth. I expanded the vegetable garden and started selling produce at the local farmers market, which gave me a small but steady income and helped me feel more connected to the community. I also began taking classes at the community college, studying agricultural science and business management, preparing for a future that felt more real and achievable with each passing month. It was during my second summer that I met Samantha Green, a veterinarian who had just moved to Milbrook to take over the practice from the retiring local vet. She was only a few years older than me, and she understood what it was like to be young and female and trying to make it in a traditional rural community. We became friends first, bonding over late-night conversations about our dreams and fears, and eventually something deeper grew between us. Samantha helped me understand that the loneliness I had carried for so long wasn't a permanent condition, that it was possible to let people in without losing yourself in the process. She was patient with my trust issues and my tendency to pull away when things got too comfortable, and she never made me feel like my unconventional background was something to be ashamed of. The farm began to thrive under my care, and I discovered that I had inherited more than just land from Elizabeth. I had inherited her green thumb, her stubborn determination, and her ability to see potential where others saw problems. The apple orchard produced its best crop in years, and I learned to make preserves and cider that I sold alongside my vegetables at the farmer's market. By my third year in Milbrook, I had paid off all the repair debts and was actually turning a small profit from the farm. More importantly, I had built a life that felt authentic and sustainable, surrounded by people who valued hard work and community over the superficial markers of success I had grown up believing were important. The house had been transformed from a neglected relic into a warm and welcoming home. I had painted every room, refinished the hardwood floors, and filled the built-in bookshelves with volumes on farming, cooking, and local history. The kitchen became the heart of the house, where I canned vegetables from my garden and baked bread with flour ground from wheat grown on neighboring farms. I started hosting dinners for my friends and neighbors, something that would have been impossible in my tiny apartment, but felt natural in the farmhouse with its large dining room and generous kitchen. These gatherings became a regular occurrence, and I realized that I was creating the kind of family environment I had always craved but never experienced. The Mustang became a symbol of my transformation, and I finally felt comfortable driving it regularly. I would take weekend trips to nearby towns, exploring the region and learning about the history and culture of my new home. Sometimes Samantha would come with me, and we would drive with the top down, music playing, feeling like we owned the world. It was during one of these drives that I discovered the full extent of Elizabeth's planning for my future. We had stopped at an antique store in a town about an hour away, and I was browsing through old photographs when I found a picture that made my heart stop. It was Elizabeth and Margaret as young women, standing next to the same red Mustang, both of them laughing and beautiful and full of life. The store owner, an elderly woman named Angela Ortiz, recognized me from the photograph and told me that Elizabeth had been a regular customer for years. She had been collecting items for what she called her future niece's house, buying furniture and decorative pieces that she thought would be perfect for the farmhouse. Angela led me to a storage room in the back of the store, and there I found dozens of items that Elizabeth had purchased over the years. There were quilts made by local artisans, pottery from regional craftspeople, and furniture pieces that would fit perfectly in the farmhouse. Each item had a tag with my name on it, and Angela explained that Elizabeth had paid for everything in advance, with instructions to contact me when I was ready. It was overwhelming to realize the depth of Elizabeth's planning, the way she had imagined my life in such detail and worked to create the foundation for my happiness. But it was also deeply moving to understand that someone had believed in my potential even when I couldn't see it myself. I spent that afternoon loading the Mustang and Samantha's truck with treasures that Elizabeth had chosen for me, and driving home felt like completing a circle that had been decades in the making. Each item found its perfect place in the farmhouse, and by evening the house felt more complete than it ever had before. The fourth year brought new challenges and opportunities. The farm was successful enough that I was able to hire seasonal help during harvest time, and I began mentoring other young people who were interested in sustainable agriculture. I also started teaching classes at the community college, sharing what I had learned about organic farming and small business management. Jonathan Jones became like a father to me, offering guidance and support without ever making me feel dependent or incapable. He taught me about crop insurance and equipment maintenance, and he was always available when I needed advice or just someone to talk through a problem. His faith in my abilities helped me develop confidence in my own judgment. The community that had once seemed foreign and intimidating became my chosen family. I served on the board of the farmers market, volunteered at the local food bank, and participated in the annual harvest festival that brought the whole town together. I was no longer the outsider who had inherited a farm. I was Donna Nguyen, a valued member of the community who happened to have an interesting backstory. Samantha and I moved in together during my fourth year, and the farmhouse finally felt like the family home it was meant to be. We talked about marriage and children, about expanding the farm and maybe starting a family of our own. The future that had once seemed so uncertain and frightening was now full of possibilities and plans. The Mustang had become more than just a car. It was a connection to the family history I had never known I had. I learned to maintain it myself, working with Douglas Jackson, a mechanic in town who specialized in classic cars. He taught me about engine maintenance and bodywork, and I found the same satisfaction in caring for the car that I found in tending the farm. On quiet evenings, I would sit on the farmhouse porch and look out over the fields that were now truly mine, not just legally but emotionally. I had learned every inch of the property, knew which areas were prone to flooding and which got the best morning sun. I could read the weather and the behavior of the animals and the color of the sky, and I understood the rhythms of the seasons in a way that felt ancient and instinctive. The girl who had left the children's home with nothing but garbage bags and a heart full of questions had become a woman who owned land and a business and a classic car. But more importantly, she had become someone who belonged somewhere, who was part of a community, who had people who cared about her success and happiness. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt and loneliness, financial stress, and physical exhaustion. But each challenge had made me stronger and more confident, and each success had built on the previous ones until I had created a life that exceeded even Elizabeth's generous imagination. I think about Elizabeth often, especially when I'm working in the garden or driving the Mustang on country roads. I wish I could tell her about the life I've built with her gifts, about the community that has embraced me and the love I've found with Samantha. I wish I could thank her for seeing potential in a lost girl and for having the courage to reach out across the years with her generosity. The farm continues to grow and evolve, and I'm always learning new techniques and exploring new possibilities. I've added a small herd of goats and a flock of chickens, and I'm planning to build a greenhouse that will allow me to extend the growing season. The business side of farming has become easier as I've gained experience, and I'm even considering expanding into agritourism, offering farm stays and educational workshops. But the most important thing I've learned is that family isn't just about blood relations or legal documents. Family is about the people who show up for you, who believe in your potential, and who help you become the person you're meant to be. Elizabeth gave me that gift through her posthumous generosity, but the community of Milbrook has given it to me every day since I arrived. The key that opened the shed was just a piece of metal, but it unlocked so much more than a car. It opened the door to a life I never could have imagined, to a sense of belonging that I thought was reserved for other people, to the understanding that home isn't just a place you live, but a feeling you carry inside you. Now, 5 years after that first trip to Milbrook, I wake up every morning in a house that feels like home, surrounded by land that I've learned to tend and love. I drive the Mustang to town for groceries and coffee with friends, and I never take for granted the simple pleasure of having somewhere to go and people who are happy to see me when I get there. The girl who aged out of the foster system with nothing has become a woman with everything that matters, not because of the money or the property, but because of the connections and the purpose and the sense of belonging that came with them. Elizabeth's gifts gave me the foundation, but I had to build the life myself, and that makes it even more precious. I still have the original key, the brass one that opened the shed, and I keep it on my keychain as a reminder of the moment when everything changed. Sometimes I hold it and remember that day, the way my hands shook as I turned the lock, the way my heart raced when I saw the car for the first time, the way it felt to realize that someone had been planning for my happiness all along. The key reminds me that transformation is possible, that the circumstances of your birth don't determine the trajectory of your life, and that sometimes the most important gifts come from the most unexpected places. It reminds me that family can find you even when you think you're completely alone, and that home is something you can create for yourself if you're willing to work for it. Looking back now, I can see that every challenge I faced in those early years was preparing me for this life. The resilience I developed moving from foster home to foster home taught me how to adapt to new situations. The independence I learned aging out of the system gave me the confidence to tackle farm repairs and business decisions. Even the loneliness I experienced helped me appreciate the community I eventually found. Elizabeth's letter said that she hoped the farm would give me what she had never been able to provide, and it has given me all of that and more. It has given me a place to belong, work that feels meaningful, and the security that comes from owning something that no one can take away. But most importantly, it has given me the chance to create the kind of family I always wanted, not through blood or legal obligation, but through choice and commitment and love. The farmhouse is full of life now, with friends stopping by for dinner and neighbors calling to check on the crops, and Samantha's veterinary clients bringing their animals for treatment in the barn we converted into a clinic. The property that was once isolated and neglected has become a gathering place, a center of community activity that would make Elizabeth proud. I've learned to see the farm not just as my home, but as my responsibility to the community and to the future. I practice sustainable farming methods that protect the soil and water for the next generation, and I mentor young people who are interested in agriculture and rural life. The knowledge and skills that Jonathan Jones and others shared with me, I now pass on to others, creating a chain of learning and support that extends far beyond my own property. The Mustang has become part of the farm's story too. I drive it in the annual parade during Harvest Festival, and it's always a crowd favorite. Children point and wave, and older residents share their own memories of classic cars and young love, and the dreams that carried them through their own transformative years. The car connects me not just to my family history, but to the broader history of the community I've joined. Sometimes I take groups of foster children from the city on tours of the farm, showing them the gardens and the animals, and explaining how food grows from seed to harvest. I see myself in their eyes, the hunger for belonging and the fear that they'll never find their place in the world. I tell them about Elizabeth and the unexpected inheritance, about the key that changed everything, and about the possibility that their own transformation might be waiting just around the corner. I don't sugarcoat the challenges or pretend that a simple change of location can solve all problems. I talk about the hard work and the loneliness and the moments of doubt that are part of any major life change. But I also talk about the satisfaction of building something with your own hands, about the peace that comes from knowing where you belong, and about the family you can create when you open your heart to the possibility of connection. These conversations remind me how far I've traveled, not just geographically, but emotionally and spiritually. The girl who left the children's home feeling worthless and unwanted has become a woman who knows her own value, who contributes to her community, and who has something meaningful to offer others. The transformation wasn't just about gaining property or money, it was about discovering my own strength and potential. The farm has taught me patience in a way that nothing else could have. You can't rush the growing season or force plants to mature faster than their natural rhythm. You have to trust the process, do the work consistently, and wait for the results. This lesson has applied to every aspect of my new life, from building relationships, to developing business skills, to healing from the wounds of my childhood. I've also learned about legacy in a way I never understood before. Elizabeth's gift wasn't just about providing for my immediate needs. It was about giving me the tools to create something lasting, something that could benefit others and continue beyond my own lifetime. I think about what I want to leave behind, how I want to be remembered, and how I can use the advantages I've been given to help others find their own paths to belonging and purpose. The community has taught me about the importance of showing up, of being present for both celebrations and sorrows. When Jonathan Jones's father died, I was there to help with the harvest so he could take time to grieve. When the diner flooded during a spring storm, I was there with a mop and a willingness to work. These acts of service have connected me to the community in ways that go far deeper than simple neighborliness. Samantha and I got engaged last spring, and we're planning a wedding that will take place right here on the farm, under the apple trees that I've learned to tend with such care. The ceremony will be simple and meaningful, surrounded by the friends who have become our chosen family in the land that has given us both a sense of purpose and belonging. We've talked about children and what it would mean to raise them here, to give them the stability and security that neither of us had growing up. I think about the bedrooms upstairs that could be filled with laughter and the sound of small feet running through the halls. I imagine teaching them to garden and to drive the tractor, to understand the value of hard work and the importance of caring for the land. But I also think about fostering children who need temporary homes, about providing the kind of safe and loving environment that I wished for during my own years in the system. The farmhouse is big enough to accommodate several children, and the community is the kind of place where kids can grow up knowing they belong, surrounded by adults who care about their success and well-being. The business continues to grow, and I'm exploring new opportunities that could provide employment for other young people who are aging out of the foster system. I'm working with social services to develop a program that would combine job training with temporary housing, giving young adults the skills and support they need to build independent lives. These plans feel like natural extensions of the gifts Elizabeth gave me, ways to multiply the impact of her generosity and create opportunities for others who find themselves in situations similar to mine. I can't give everyone a farm and a classic car, but I can offer employment and mentorship and the chance to be part of a community that values their contributions. The key that started this journey sits on my kitchen windowsill now, catching the morning light as I drink coffee and plan my day. It's become a talisman of sorts, a reminder that transformation is possible and that sometimes the most important gifts come in small packages. When visitors ask about it, I tell them the story of Elizabeth and the inheritance and the moment when everything changed. But I also tell them that the key was just the beginning, that the real work of building a life came afterward. The property and the money gave me opportunities, but I had to choose to embrace those opportunities, to do the hard work of learning and growing and connecting with others. The transformation happened because I was willing to step into uncertainty and trust that I could handle whatever came next. Looking back, I can see that Elizabeth's gift was perfectly timed, arriving exactly when I was old enough to appreciate it, but young enough to build something lasting with it. If it had come earlier, I might not have had the maturity to handle the responsibility. If it had come later, I might have been too set in my ways to embrace such a dramatic change. The timing reminds me that there's a wisdom to life's unfolding that we can't always see in the moment. The years of moving between foster homes taught me resilience and adaptability. The months of working at the grocery store and living in that tiny apartment showed me what I didn't want from life and motivated me to embrace something better when the opportunity arose. Even the loneliness and uncertainty I experienced were necessary parts of my journey because they helped me recognize and appreciate the belonging and security I eventually found. You can't fully appreciate light without having experienced darkness, and you can't understand the value of home without having been homeless. Now, as I write this story 5 years after that first trip to Milbrook, I'm sitting on the wraparound porch of the farmhouse, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The apple trees are heavy with fruit. The vegetable garden is producing its final harvest of the season, and the Mustang is parked in the driveway, its red paint gleaming in the fading light. Samantha's in the kitchen preparing dinner, and I can hear her humming as she works. Friends will be arriving soon for our weekly gathering, and the house will fill with laughter and conversation and the warm feeling of people who care about each other sharing a meal in their lives. This is what Elizabeth imagined when she planned her gift, this sense of belonging and purpose and joy. She couldn't have known the specific details of how my life would unfold, but she understood what I needed and gave me the tools to create it for myself. The inheritance wasn't just about money or property. It was about possibility and potential and the chance to become the person I was meant to be. To anyone who feels lost or alone or convinced that their circumstances will never change, I want you to know that transformation is possible. It might not come in the form of an unexpected inheritance, but it will come if you're open to recognizing and embracing the opportunities that present themselves. Sometimes those opportunities look like challenges or risks or changes that feel too big to handle. Sometimes they require leaving behind the familiar and stepping into uncertainty. But if you're willing to do the work, to trust the process, and to believe in your own potential, you can create a life that exceeds your wildest dreams. The key that Elizabeth left me opened more than just a shed door. It opened the door to belonging, to purpose, to love, and to the understanding that home isn't just a place you find, but something you create through your choices and your connections and your willingness to invest in something bigger than yourself. I keep that key as a reminder that we all have the power to unlock our own transformations, to turn the circumstances of our birth into the foundation for the lives we choose to build. Elizabeth gave me the tools, but I had to use them. She provided the opportunity, but I had to embrace it. And now, as I look out over the land that has become my home and the community that has become my family, I know that the girl who left the orphanage empty-handed was actually carrying everything she needed inside her all along. The courage, the resilience, the capacity for love and growth and connection were always there, waiting for the right moment and the right key to set them free. If you're watching this and feeling like you're still waiting for your own transformation, remember that it might be closer than you think. Keep your heart open to unexpected possibilities. Trust in your own strength and potential, and never underestimate the power of a small key to unlock a completely new life. What unexpected gift or opportunity changed your life? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories about finding belonging and creating the life you've always dreamed of. Sometimes the most important doors are the ones we never knew existed, just waiting for us to find the courage to turn the key.